What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp Podcast. I am here with nobody. I'm here by myself, flying solo today. And, there's just been a plethora of news and things to talk about in the NHL, so let's just jump right into it. And we're going to start with everyone's favorite punching bag this season. Sorry, Buffalo Sabres fans. I hate to say it, but the Buffalo Sabres trade Eric Staal, and they retain half of his salary, so $1.625 million, to the Montreal Canadiens for a third-round pick and a fifth-round pick, both of them in this year. So, to a certain extent, the fire sale has started in Buffalo. And we knew that this was going to be the plan. So the funny part is Buffalo technically doesn't gain any draft picks out of this because they traded away their third this year for Jimmy Vesey, and they traded the fifth for Wayne Simmons. So technically they just get back to having, now they have 8 picks because they have a pick from the Colorado Avalanche, which I believe was in the trade for Jonas Johansson. So the Sabres basically get back to net even. They have 8 picks now, 1 in every round except for 2 in the 6th. And they get half of Staal's contract off the books. Not really like they're hurting for cap space. They currently have, $1.2 million, with more trades looking like they're going to be on the way. And, I like this trade for both teams. So I like this trade for Buffalo because it needed to happen. They need to get something out of the assets they have on the books. Taylor Hall's contract is up at the end of this year. He's going to obviously be a UFA. Brandon Montour's contract, UFA. Matt Irwin's contract, UFA. Both their goalies' contracts are up, UFA. And I have a hard time thinking, Taylor Hall's gone. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Taylor Hall is not going to be on this team at the end of this year. Oh, I forgot Jake McCabe, by the way. His contract is also up at the end of this year. So, there's no way Taylor Hall re-signs with this team. And I have a really hard time thinking that Tobias Reeder or Riley Sheahan are going to sign with this team either. Brandon Montour's probably gone. Matt Irwin is probably gone. I mean, these guys are they're too old, or they're in a position where they need to start competing now, such as a guy like Brandon Montour or Linus Ullmark. Linus Ullmark is 27 years old. For what reason does he have to re-sign with the Buffalo Sabres at this point? Management has shown basically no faith in the team. They haven't improved the spots that they needed to improve. Not for nothing, the moves this offseason were good. You bring in a guy like Taylor Hall, you bring in a guy like Eric Staal, you have a pretty nasty top 6, but they didn't address the issues on defense, and they didn't address the issues they have in the net. So lo and behold, the team isn't performing. And not to mention, they just have some anchor weights on this team, just soaking up minutes. And guys like Kyle Okposo, who, it's not necessarily his fault that his contract went off the rails because, he had concussion issues and whatnot. But, so you can't really pin that on him. But a guy like Kyle Okposo just eating up $6 million. A guy like Jeff Skinner eating up $9 million a year. Who, by the way, guess what? Jeff Skinner has been on the 4th line at points. And he's been scratched at points. So there's too many dead weights on this team, and there's just too many moving parts to really salvage the ship at this point, I think. I honestly think that the Buffalo Sabres' best bet is to completely tear it down. And yes, that includes Jack Eichel. I think he has to go because, quite honestly, he's wasting his time on this team. He's a transcendent NHL talent who is doing nothing but killing his prime. He's hurt now. He was injured. There's no reason for him to be on this team much longer. because he's a fiery guy. He wants to compete, and he's never had the team to do it. There's no reason for the Sabres to hang on to him because you're just going to have a disgruntled and angry Jack Eichel, who that's not good for the locker room culture. And it's no fault of Jack Eichel's. I mean, the guy's been on the team for 6 years, and they've never even sniffed the playoffs. They've never even come close. You know, their best season was his rookie season, and it's been worse and worse every year. And management has done nothing at all to address the issues on the team. So I think you got to trade Jack Eichel. I think you got to trade Sam Reinhart. I think you got to trade Victor Olofsson. I mean, these guys are 25. They're going to be 26. By the time you fully finish a second rebuild, these guys are going to be in their 30s. Are they going to want to sit between their 20s, you know, their mid-20s to early 30s on a rebuilding team? I mean, first of all, it's not fair to them because they've already sat through your garbage organization for as long as they have. And it's, you know, at some point they're just going to ask for a trade. So obviously, you know, you can't just do all of this in one offseason, right? Like, you're stuck with the Jeff Skinner contract. Nobody's taking that. You're stuck with the Kyle Okposo contract. Nobody's taking that. But I think you get, and I think that it's, you know, you can get some good assets out of guys like Sam Reinhart, especially because you need to trade them now. Because if things get worse and these guys fall off, you've lost assets at that point. And there's a very high likelihood that would happen, considering that these guys are going to be on a team that's rebuilding, so their stats are going to go down, the perception around the league is going to go down. It's bad. It's bad. So I think you got to blow it up. I think everybody whose name isn't Rasmus Dahlin, I think you toss on the trade block and just tell everyone, hey, or besides, you know, yeah, okay, maybe not everyone. Like, you keep Dylan Cousins, you keep Casey Middlestat, but guys like Taylor Hall, Sam Reinhart, Olofsson, Eakin, Ristolainen even, Colin Miller, both your goalies. You know, you keep Henry Jokiharju, you keep Rasmus Dahlin to build around, because I think that the perception that Dahlin is a bust is ridiculous. He's playing on the Buffalo Sabres, period, full stop. And he's been nothing but a bright spot for them. So you keep Dahlin, you keep Jokiharju, 20 and 21 years old. You keep your other prospects like Cousins, who's 20, Middlestat is 22. Everyone else you throw on a trade block so you can get. Because there's no salvaging. This is basically like a Frankenstein's monster team right now. You've got pieces falling off. You've got pieces being sewn into place. You've got stitched up places. You've got Band-Aids on places there shouldn't be. The team is an absolute disaster in basically every sense of the word. So you've got to get something out of it. You do not have an option. And there's no building with a team like this. There's no rebuilding with the amount of albatross contracts that are on this team. You can't. It's just, you're asking too much. So I hate to say it, but you know, because at the top of the season I said I wanted the Sabres to prove me wrong and make the playoffs. It's not happening. I'm like an 18-game losing streak, maybe 19 by the end of tonight. It's horrendous. So, from the Montreal Canadiens perspective, you know, I do like this move. It gives them a very deep center core. Now you've got Nick Suzuki, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and Eric Staal as your top three. You can throw Eric Staal on a power play if need be. It's a deep, deep team now, which I think is something we really have never really seen from Montreal, is deep down the middle. We've always seen them try to build out from the wings. And I think that this is a good move for them. It gives them flexibility on the power play. It gives them a little bit of flexibility on the penalty kill. If you need to, you can toss them out there. And it gives him a little bit of size with the middle, too. I mean, Stahl's a big dude. I think he's like 6'3", 6'4". You know, he's not the stockiest man, but in terms of his height, he's one of the taller players on the team. So, and he really didn't give up all that much for him. He gave up a third and a fifth, and they kept half his salary for you for the year. So, from the Montreal Canadiens' perspective, I think this is a great move. I don't know that it moves the needle all that much for me in terms of my perception of what kind of team they are and where they're going to end up when the playoffs is all said and done. However, I think it's a great move. Depth down the middle is always great. You can never have too much depth in the center position. Again, you're going to sound like a broken record, but they're still missing that elite offensive talent. They're still missing that. I almost said Taylor Hall. He's really not. And they're still missing that Tarasenko, that Kucherov, that Matt Barzal, that kind of elite talent on the roster. But, we're seeing good steps out of Suzuki. We're seeing good steps out of Kotkaniemi. Cole Caulfield now is playing in their minor league system. So the moves are coming. They're on the way. They're in a weird spot because they have a lot of aging pieces like Carey Price and Shea Weber and Jeff Petrie, trying to mix them with these younger pieces like Nick Suzuki, Kotkaniemi, eventually Cole Caulfield, and they're kind of ending up in a very bizarre mode where they're going to be too young to rebuild, too old to, too old to rebuild in the sense that they're going to have pieces that should be competing, and too young to really make super serious runs unless they have some guys that kind of step up big. So it's going to be interesting. I still see them as a threat to get out of the Canadian division, but really no more than that. I don't perceive them as being anything more than a mid-tier threat. So that's kind of just how I feel about that whole trade. So not bad. It's good for both teams. It's not like an earth-shattering game breaker, but it gets the job done. It does what it needs to do. So I do want to talk about another trade. The New York Rangers traded Brendan Lemieux to the LA Kings for a 4th-round pick. And my question, we kind of have an idea as to why this is happening. The idea is the Rangers recently bought over top prospect Vitaly Kravtsov from Russia. So the idea here is that they're going to try and, they wanted to free up a little bit of cap space. Yes, the Rangers really aren't exactly hurting for cap space, but they wanted to free up a roster spot and a lineup spot for young Vitaly Kravtsov. Now, I don't know exactly how soon he's going to be inserted into the lineup. I don't know at what role, maybe the third liner. I don't necessarily know to what extent he will be playing because Lemieux had been playing on the third line. But, there's an interesting trade because the Rangers are kind of running a little bit of a risk here. Not that Brendan Lemieux was lighting the league on fire or anything, but he was only making $1.5 million. And, I apologize for that. And you run the risk of turning yourself into the Toronto Maple Leafs to a certain extent. Because Lemieux, not for nothing, was one of the few players on the team that really plays with a lot of heart and plays with a lot of grit. He plays a rough and tumble style of hockey. He hits hard. He gets in on a forecheck. He's really not all that bad offensively either. As far as a 4th-line grinder is concerned. But, it turns the Rangers maybe into a bit one-dimensional. When you look at this roster, I don't really see that many guys that I would consider super hard to play against. Ryan Lindgren comes to mind. Brendan Smith, when he's in a lineup, is a big body. But that's really kind of it. Guys like DiGiuseppe and Blackwell, they're not bad players, but they're not exactly, the heaviest or the hardest hitting. And I thought Lemieux was a nice piece for this team. He's kind of like the Wayne Simmons of the Toronto Maple Leafs for the New York Rangers, where he's that guy that when you're on the ice with him, you have to pick your head up, right? He's that threat. And the threat sometimes is more important than the actual hit. The threat of a hit can sometimes be just as important as actually throwing a hit. And so this is an interesting trade. I understand why the New York Rangers wanted to make it. They wanted to free up the ice time. They wanted to free up the roster spot, maybe a little bit of cap in order to get Vitaly Kravtsov involved, but I don't really know where it's going. And Brendan Lemieux, he's only 25 and he's kind of a prototypical LA King. So maybe this is the LA Kings way of kind of saying we're not going to fully commit to the rebuild just yet. Maybe this is their way of saying we're just going to try to capitalize on this somewhat renaissance that we have going on with the roster and bring in another prototypical hard-hitting, heavy power forward type player. So, from the LA Kings, it's a low-risk thing. It's a fourth-round pick. If he doesn't work out, he's still an RFA at the end of his contract. You can always flip him at the trade deadline. So, or the trade deadline next year maybe, or even this year if you really, really wanted to. I'm sure some team would take him. He's only making $1.5 million. So, it's a great trade, I think, for the LA Kings because it's a low-risk thing. You're only trading a fourth-round pick. They have a fourth-round pick from Calgary anyway. From the Rangers, it's a great trade in terms of you open up a little bit of room on the roster for maybe some of the younger guys, but it does worry me a little bit in terms of becoming a one-dimensional hockey club. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the kind of some news surrounding some goaltending, that being Carter Hart and that being Frederik Andersen. So, it's no secret this year that the Philadelphia Flyers goaltenders have struggled. It's been a rough go for the team in general, but very specifically young Carter Hart. His stats are all over the place. They're not good. He looks like he's all over the place. And quite honestly, even though Brian Elliott's stats might be better, I don't think that Brian Elliott looks that much better when you look at the eye test. He doesn't look calm. He doesn't look collected. He's dropping a lot of pucks. He's not controlling his rebounds. It's just kind of a mess. And look, if you're one of the people that is sitting there saying that the goaltending of the Flyers is why they're struggling so much, I'm going to need you to actually sit down and watch a Philadelphia Flyers game, because when you watch the game, you can tell that the defense is just horrendously all over the place. I'm just going to take a quick sip of water here. It's just a mess. It's just, the center of the ice is free real estate for them, or for anybody playing against them. I was listening to Steven Valiquette talk one day on the Sportsnet podcast, and he was saying that when he was in the minors, they took one of the boards, right, and they drew a line from the goal line, from the center of the goal line, vertically. So it's the center of the defensive zone up to about the top hash mark. And they said, okay, what we're going to do this year is nobody's allowed to make a pass on the attacking team while we're defending. None of our opponents are allowed to make a pass that goes through that center line. So that center line is a non-negotiable line. You cannot let a pass go through here. And he said when they did that, it turned their goalie save percentage from a 900 to, I think he said, like a 920. So they increased their goalie save percentage by 20%. And now if you take the goal crease and you draw a line from that center vertical line, from the center of the goal crease out to the dots, and then connect it across, making kind of almost like a trapezoid type situation. If you blocked every shot in that area, which is essentially the high danger chances, the slot, You take a line from each goal post out to each face-off dot and then connect it across. You make a trapezoid. If you blocked every single shot in that soft area, you'd also increase your goalie save percentage by 20%. So with all that in mind, when you look at what's happening against the Flyers, it's complete chaos. They're not covering the cross creases. Passes are going across that imaginary line basically at will. The shots are coming from in tight. They're coming from the high slot, the one-timers from the circles. They're not boxing out on the rebounds. Their goalies are getting crushed in the crease because these guys are getting second, third, fourth chances at rebounds. It's absolutely horrendous what is happening against the Flyers. I'm serious. Just watch a game. Just take a look, take a good hard look when you watch a Flyers game. Watch the goals that are going in, and if you honestly think that a lot of the, obviously, look, there are some goals that Carter Hart and Brian Elliott would want back, specifically Carter Hart, because he was making those saves last year. But we need to ask ourselves, is Carter Hart really having a bad season, or is he just not making up for those complete defensive lapses anymore? Are we really seeing the same defensive breakdowns as we did last year, but the difference is the goalies aren't covering it up? Because goaltending covers up a world of mistakes. If you make a bad mistake and your goalie bails you out, it's covered up. Puck didn't go in the net. You play on. And Carter Hart was doing that a lot last year. He was making saves he had absolutely no business making. And so I don't know necessarily what's happened to the Flyers. They really, the roster shakeup from last year to this year really hasn't been that crazy. They lost Matt Niskanen to retirement. That's a big loss, but they still have Ivan Provorov. They still have Travis Sanheim. Shane Gostisbehere has been having a renaissance year for them. He was having a rough year last year, and they were able to play through that with the help of Matt Niskanen. But Gostisbehere's back on track. Justin Braun's having a good season. Nolan Patrick is finally healthy. All signs point to this team being, on paper, better than they were last year. I don't think it's that crazy to say that when you look at the roster they played with last year compared to this year, a healthy Nolan Patrick and a getting back up to speed and playing to his potential Shane Gostisbehere should be enough to outdo the damage of losing Matt Niskanen to retirement. I don't think it's that crazy to say that. And yet what we're seeing is a complete and total collapse of this team's defense in every facet of the game. They look like they've never defended ever. And so Carter Hart recently has been scratched. In fact, he was not even, he was scratched. He wasn't dressed to play. He watched the last couple of games in the press box, and I think that's a good thing. I think, as a goalie sometimes, you need a night of no pressure. Because even when you're the backup, right, there's still a little bit of pressure. Because you still have to get ready as if you might be playing. And you still have to do the morning practice and get through your routine as if you're playing. And you still have to sit on a bench. And they've been getting blown out lately. So him going in relief has not exactly been a rare occurrence as of late. You still have to do all these things that you would normally do as if you were going to play that night. But when you're scratched, you get to see the ice a different way. You're sitting up in the press box, and sure, nobody ever wants to be scratched. I'm not saying Carter Hart's like, yeah, I'm scratched, I'm not playing tonight. But I think it might be good for his mental health just to have a couple of games where he says, look, there's no pressure. I'm not playing tonight. I can relax. Let me take the game in from upstairs. Let me read my defense. Maybe they're playing a different scheme this year under AV. I'm not entirely positive, but maybe he can look up at the press box, from a top-down perspective, and say, "Oh, okay, this is how our defense is playing this play. So this is what I need to do." Oh, okay, they're gonna give this guy the shot on the short side, so I need to cover the short side because we have two down low for the pass. Or maybe he's saying, oh, look, they're giving up the pass really hard. And so I need to mentally prepare to get that quick push across. And I think, it's a good thing for him. I think especially a guy as young as him. I mean, Carter Hart, all things considered, is a very young goaltender. He's 22 years old. He's playing in his second full year, essentially. I mean, he played 31 games in 2018-19. He played a full sequence of games last year. He played 14 games in the playoffs, and he was really good. He had a 2.23 and a 9.26, but this year he's got a 4.04 and an 8.69. I mean, you can't sit here and tell me that he's just having that awful of a season. You don't go from a 2.42 and a 9.14 in a regular season to a 4.04 and an 8.69 without your defense screwing up somewhere really badly. So, and if you want to pull the, Brian Elliott, well, what's he doing? He's playing great, right? Yeah, Brian Elliott's playing fantastic, right? He has a 2.84 and an 8.93. So, you want to tell me that an 8.93 is a good save percentage for your goalies? Because you're crazy. If you want to sit here and tell me that below 900 save percentage on both your goalies is what you're looking for, not a chance. So I don't know what to tell anybody that legitimately thinks that the goalies are the issue in Philly. Sure, they're part of the problem because Carter Hart's not covering up for the complete lack of defense that his team is displaying. However, he's not the problem. And if you think so, again, I urge you, please just watch a Philadelphia Flyers game. And I just want to point something out, okay? The reporter who broke the news story, the latest news conundrum surrounding Carter Hart is he was seeing a sports psychiatrist or sports therapist, I believe they might be called. He was seeing somebody whose job it is to deal with the mental aspect of sports. And these type of people have been very helpful to some NHL players in the past. In fact, when Marc-Andre Fleury was having his struggles in Pittsburgh, he saw a sports psychiatrist. And look what happened to him when he came over to Vegas. He was a new guy. You saw the glow on his face again. You saw that confidence. So this is not unprecedented for somebody to be seeing a sports psychiatrist. Again, I apologize for saying the wrong word, but I believe they're called sports psychiatrists. It might be called sports therapist, but it's not uncommon for this to happen. It's actually very common for this to happen. And yet, for some reason, some like B-grade news hack in Philly broke the story that he was seeing a sports psychiatrist because it was important to him. And, this is the same kind of crap that Austin Matthews had to deal with when he tested positive for COVID. It's ridiculous. We should not have reporters basically exploiting private, medical or mental health information for a click or for an article buy. Okay? We also had the same issue with Robin Leonard this year, where Robin Leonard was hurt, he wasn't playing, and some people were like, oh, maybe, what's wrong with his mental state? And it turned out that he had a friggin' concussion. So I'm calling out hockey media. Do better. Be better. We cannot have this become a part of our game. We cannot have these B-grade, no-talent hacks in the media exposing private medical health information or private mental health information in the case of Carter Hart. And yes, a sports psychiatrist is different than a regular psychiatrist. I understand that. Carter Hart, as far as we know, is not dealing with something such as depression or something as serious as, crippling anxiety. As far as we know, he could be, and I don't want to say he's not for sure because I'm not a psychiatrist, and that's not my place to postulate on that. However, and to that point, it's still something private for him. He's seeing a sports psychiatrist because he feels like he wants to, get back in that mental game. And to basically write an article suggesting that this is either a bad thing or something that Flyers fans need to worry about or be aware of is absurd. It's absolutely ridiculous. And to any of the people that were writing articles speculating about Robin Lehner and his mental health, you guys are clowns too. The guy had a concussion. It's not your place to speculate on that. It's not your place. So I'm calling out hockey media in general. Be better and do better. This cannot become a part of our game where players' mental and physical health becomes a clickbait article. It just cannot happen. It's disgusting. It's ridiculous. And we just have to do better. So that's, just a little bit of a rant piece on that. And so I want to switch to another goaltender. Like I said, Freddie Andersen, similar to Carter Hart, has had his struggles this year. And look, nobody's going to sit here and tell you that the Toronto Maple Leafs defense is stout in any way, shape, or form. Freddie Andersen has a 2.91 and an 8.97. Kind of similar to his stats last year. We had a 2.77 and a 2.85 and a 9.09. And I just think that I don't really understand where people are coming from and what they're expecting out of Frederik Andersen. I mean, look, has he had a couple that he wants back? Sure. And I think you can see to a certain extent that he's having some difficulties trusting his teammates, we'll say. You can see on some plays he's overcommitting. On some plays he's flinching in terms of, he's questioning himself. Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? He's not as dynamic as he has been in the past. And I think you're really starting to see the effects of a very porous and, let's be honest here, incredibly questionable Toronto Maple Leafs defense start to impact his play. In a similar situation to what I was saying about PK Subban last year, where his team was really kind of part of the issue with not trusting his team, trying to do too much, you're seeing a similar situation with Freddie Andersen. And so he's also been scratched as of late. He took a couple games off. They sat him up in a press box. And then it came out that he was hurt. And he had been playing hurt for a while. And I think that the lampooning of this guy from Toronto media, and lampooning is not even the right word, he's basically being borderline crucified by the media up there for, I guess, not getting a shutout every game. I don't really know what their expectations are of him. I think if you're going to look at an issue in Toronto, you need to really question how good is our defense. And, the Toronto Maple Leafs have a 2.61 goals against average. They're one of the best teams in the North Division. The North Division sucks, okay? Let's not beat around the bush. Let's not pretend anymore. The North Division is horrible. You've got the Senators, who are rebuilding. You've got the Canucks, who apparently just forgot how to play hockey. You've got the Flames, who are severely underperforming. You've got the Canadiens, who, after being the best team in the NHL, have come back down to earth. The North Division is garbage. Even the best teams, the Oilers can't defend. The Maple Leafs are soft. You can't convince me that this is a competitive, great division, okay? None of these teams are Stanley Cup contenders. And I don't want to hear any crap about, the Toronto Maple Leafs actually have a good defense. They really don't, okay? I think Morgan Rielly is a great offensive defenseman. In his own zone, he's questionable. I think Jake Muzzin's a great defensive defenseman. I think Zach Bogosian is a pretty good, nasty, nose to the grindstone defender as well. And I really did like the moves that the Toronto Maple Leafs made in this past season to kind of get a little bit nastier. But let's not pretend that they're getting great defense from any of their forwards. Austin Matthews is not winning a Selke trophy, nor is Alexander Kerfoot, nor is Jason Spezza, nor is basically any other center that they have, and none of their wingers for that matter. They have 4 scoring lines. And so again, I urge you, when you watch these games, don't just look at the final score. Even a game where Jack Campbell is playing, really watch the game. Because I genuinely don't think that Jack Campbell is necessarily lighting the league on fire in a way that Freddie Andersen can't. Jack Campbell right now is playing hot. He's playing great. I'm not taking anything away from Jack Campbell. He's playing absolutely fantastically for the Toronto Maple Leafs. There's no question about it. But watch the kind of saves he's had to make. And question yourself, if a goal went in there, would you really have blamed him for that? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't be blaming that same goal on Freddie Andersen. And I think that Freddie Andersen is legitimately out after this season. I cannot see him wanting to re-sign in Toronto after dealing with the media, dealing with the pressure, dealing with the grilling he's been getting from Toronto media. I think that he's probably going to ask, or not ask for a trade. Apparently his name's on a trade block, which is ridiculous, by the way, because, yeah, I'd like to see the Toronto Maple Leafs without Freddie Andersen. And but his contract's up at the end of the year, and I don't really see him wanting to deal with this anymore. He's not getting support from his teammates. He's not getting support from anybody. The media in Toronto is just horrendous. I mean, all they are is a bunch of attack artists, generally speaking. Not all of them. I think the guys at Sportsnet do a really, really good job. I really like the guys on TSN, but like the local Toronto media, for the most part, is pretty crap, honestly, and they're pretty aggressive towards their players. And so I think Freddie Andersen, honestly, is probably going to look at this team after this season and just say, look, I'm a 31-year-old guy. I don't got to deal with this anymore. This is ridiculous. And I think he's going to be out. And so the question then becomes, what does Toronto do in net? What is the answer for the Toronto Maple Leafs if Freddie Andersen leaves at the end of the season and says, well, I don't want anything to do with this team anymore? It's a good question. I'm not really sure what the answer is, because we have to see, who's going to be really available during the offseason / trade deadline, or not trade deadline, during the offseason for free agency. I'm not really super aware of the potential goalies that are out there just yet, and that can always change at the drop of a hat anyway, considering that some guys might be getting bought out or just not re-upped. So I don't know what the answer in net for the Toronto Maple Leafs is, because as much as I currently love the way that Jack Campbell's playing, he's playing absolutely fantastic. If you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, do you want to run the risk of running with him as your starter all next season on a team that, in theory, should be competing for a Stanley Cup? In theory. There's a question around that, because you don't want to pull a Pittsburgh Penguins at the beginning of the season. They're playing very well as of late. But at the beginning of the season, it was like, oh, Jari and DeSmith, they're not the answer. Right. You don't want to be put in a position like the Washington Capitals, where Samsonov goes out, and thank God Vitek Vanacek stepped in and was ready to play, because if he wasn't, then it's like, oh, right, what do we do? So it's interesting. I mean, I do want to keep an eye on the Toronto Maple Leafs and their potential fixes in net. I mean, James Reimer's name has been linked to them, and I doubt he wants to go play for them ever again after what they did to him. That whole Jonathan Bernier situation was just absurd. But it's going to be interesting. I definitely want to keep an eye on the Toronto Maple Leafs, but Next time you watch a Flyers game, next time you watch a Leafs game, look at the goals that are going in and really ask yourself, what is the percentage chance that the goalie had on that shot? Because more often than not, it's pretty low. It's a pretty low percentage that the goalie should have had that. So just something to keep in mind here going forward. And so one last topic that I wanted to talk about is Aaron Ekblad and the Florida Panthers. So, yeah, Aaron Ekblad suffered a absolutely horrendous injury. It was hard to watch, honestly, and my thoughts and well wishes and good energy, and I'm sure that I speak for everyone on the podcast as well as everyone in the hockey community. Well wishes and a fast recovery to Aaron Ekblad, who fractured his leg in just really a freak incident, essentially. It was just a bizarre, his leg got clipped, but then he landed on it weird and it buckled underneath him. Just bad. And he had surgery. He's done for the year. And so now this, it gets interesting for the Florida Panthers because they're in a very competitive position right now. The Florida Panthers actually, are near the top of the standings. I believe I just pull this up real quick for you guys, so I'm not just talking out my ass and not paying attention. They are 6th in points percentage, tied for the league lead in points flat, and 6th in points percentage. So, they're right up there. They're right up there with the Tampa Bay Lightning, with the Carolina Hurricanes, the Vegas Golden Knights. But you lose a guy like Aaron Ekblad, that's a tough guy to replace. I mean, you can't. The long and short, the flat answer is you don't. You don't replace a guy like Aaron Ekblad. You don't replace the leadership he brings to the locker room. You don't replace the intangibles and the energy that he brings. And he's an elite talent. Make no mistake. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what position he was drafted at. The guy is an elite talent in the NHL. Power play, penalty kill, transition, he does it all. And so now the question is, what do you do? And the options are kind of limited. I mean, Shane Gostisbehere was waived yesterday, and they didn't take a flyer on him in Florida, which I thought was interesting. They decided just to let him go through. I thought that they might actually want to just take a claim on Gostisbehere, only just because, he's got 3 years left, yes, at 4.5, so it's a bit of a heavy contract. But at the same time, sorry about that, guys, jeez. But at the same time, it's really not the worst contract in the league, and with the amount of money you're saving on Ekblad, you can definitely afford to throw him down there. Now the question would then become, what do you do with him when Ekblad's back? Which is, of course, that's a whole other can of worms. But, the Florida Panthers are currently sitting, according to Cap Friendly, on $8.6 million in cap space. Now, granted, 5.3 of that is Patrick Hornquist. We're not sure what his status is just yet. So they might only be sitting really on $3 million. But that's enough money to make a move for some of these guys that have been talked about. I know that Dmitry Kulikov from the New Jersey Devils name has been thrown around. He's only making $1.15 million. Shane Gostisbehere's name has been on the trade deadline radar. Rasmus Ristolainen's name has also been on the trade deadline radar. So we're seeing some of these guys and a lot of defensemen specifically right now floating around as options. So, Dmitry Kulikov, I think there's going to be a bidding war for him, essentially just because he's kind of the prototypical shut down, nose to the grindstone, and cheap $1.15 million defenseman that a lot of teams that are competing look for at the trade deadline. You know, a lot of teams would love a guy like him. He brings a lot of experience. He brings a lot of leadership. He brings the penalty kill. He's a simple player. He's not flashy. He's not going to wow you or anything, but he gets on the ice and he does his job. And, you know, it's one of those things where he's the kind of guy that a lot of teams are going to be hunting for. And so I'm sure the Devils are probably going to end up fetching a high price for him. If I was the Panthers, would I take a bite on him? Absolutely. I mean, I think you have to. You know, this team has played too well, and I think the players at this point have earned it. And that's a big thing a lot of GMs talk about is, you know, has the team earned a rental? You know, we're hearing that a lot. And I think the Florida Panthers have, without a doubt, earned themselves a rental player. This roster has been playing fantastically. They've been getting the wins. They've been staying up near the top of the standings in a division where they have to deal with the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Carolina Hurricanes. Surprising a lot of people, and, you know, myself included, fully guilty of being surprised by this team. And, you know, I thought coming off the offseason, I wasn't super thrilled with the moves that were being made for this hockey club. I thought they lost too much to really recover. And yet here we are where they're to the top of the standings. I mean, I put the Florida Panthers outside of the playoffs, and they're proving me wrong hard. So, yeah, I think the Panthers have absolutely earned a rental, and going after Kulikov, I think, is something that's definitely going to be in their wheelhouse. And I would love to see it. I would love to see the Florida Panthers take a flyer on a guy like Kulikov because he's a rental. You know, you're in a position where you're not going to be in this position all the time. You have to take advantage of Bobrovsky playing well, of the team clicking without some of their bigger pieces. You know, they lost Mike Hoffman in the offseason. You have to take advantage of when your team is playing the way they are. And so I think that getting that rental player is what this roster should do. So that being said, I think this is going to wrap this episode up. I will see you guys next time. I don't really know what we're going to be talking about. Maybe, let me take a look at the standings here. Let's see if we might be getting towards the 3/4 mark point of the season, which for a 56-game season, the 3/4 mark is 42 games. I don't think we're quite there yet, but maybe the week after next week's podcast. Yeah, so we're still in the 30s, so not quite at the quarter mark podcast just yet. So not really sure what we're going to be talking about next podcast. I have no clue, to be honest with you, but hopefully, you know, I say hopefully, there will be news to talk about. It's the National Hockey League. I mean, come on. You can talk about anything in the NHL, and that's what makes it so great. So, again, well wishes and positive thoughts towards Aaron Ekblad and his teammates, and I hope we see him on the ice. You know, and he's not going to be anytime soon, but I hope he comes back better than ever because he is an absolutely elite player who is having a great year, and it's a shame to see it cut so short. So, next, actually, I know what next episode's going to be because I lied right to your face. The NHL trade deadline is April 12th. So next week's podcast is going to be our trade deadline preview. So yeah, next week, stay tuned. NHL trade deadline preview. We're going to be talking about who should go where, what's it going to cost, what our team's going to look like, and then we're going to go from there. So I want to thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for our next episode. Oh, and I almost forgot. I do want to say thank you to everyone for watching, and we are finally on streaming platforms. We are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, among others. I will put those links in the description for you guys. So if you want to listen to us on your favorite streaming platforms, please do so below. There was an update mini pod put out today. So if you have any questions, please go to the mini pod and let me know. As well as anybody that's listening on any of the streaming services, don't forget we are also on YouTube, Lighting the Lamp Podcast. And follow us on Twitter at Lighting the Lamb 1. That's LAM1. Or my personal at LBG_Rob. Let me know if you guys have any topics you want us to talk about. And please feel free to follow us on your favorite streaming platforms and or YouTube. And if you have anything specific you want us to hit on, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, let me know. I am all ears. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys again next time.